This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Coffee-fueled stories. Hello. It's me, Michelle, your host and pocket DJ of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. This week is very special guest and co-host Kelly Shimabukuro. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
This is so cool. So we're doing something a little bit different. And you and I have been talking about this for quite some time, which is why you are a guest and co-host. To let the listeners know, you and I went to grad school together. We were in the trenches together.
Oh my God. Yeah, trenches is a good description.
And we became friends in the hallway. We sat for about an hour because these are the kind of students we are. So again, to let the listeners know how we connected and how we became friends. We sat in the hallway about an hour before the class started, and we would sit and read and go through notes and things of that nature. And then one day I decided, because you always had like really good responses, and I was like, this girl is really smart. I need to get to know her.
Well, thank you for that. I don't know if I'm smart so much as just really good at faking sounding smart.
You are Hermione in my phone because you are that smart.
Oh, thank you.
And we became friends like instantly. And so today's discussion, we kind of have how we're going to set the show up, this is going to be like our hallway chats about this freaking awesome book.
God, this book.
Right? Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. We're not going to go into academic detail, but this is what you and I do, what we've been doing since our friendship started. Sitting and drinking coffee, talking about books.
Exactly. The fun kind of discussion. I want to say book club, but maybe one notch higher because of the fact that we are lit majors. We got our master's degrees. So it's book club, but one notch higher, but still accessible.
Yeah. But
we want people to be very interested in this book. Well, it's like, this book, guys, this book.
Oh my God. Okay. So you finished it before I did.
Yeah.
So you had to contain your enthusiasm until I caught up with you.
Oh, I know. And it was really, really hard. I've told you before, I tend to read 50 to 60 books a year, and I can't really form my top 10 of that year until about March or April. I can say with confidence that Ronald Malfi's Come With Me is going to end up on that top 10. Yes. Where on the list? I'm not sure. Quite possibly within the top 5. This book is incredible. The writing is phenomenal. Why aren't more people talking about him?
Yes, absolutely. So we decided to do kind of like a theme for this book because, and we're not going to go into, because you and I have both recovered from grief nicely. No, not to say that it doesn't, come back. But we have a theme for this particular book so that we can kind of stay focused.
Yeah, otherwise it's going to be everywhere.
Yes. And we don't want to give away spoilers because it is such a good book. And so we are going with horror as healing as our theme.
Yes.
Because you recently lost your mom.
I lost my mom, May 2023. So we're clocking in on 10-month mark. So it's one of those where a little more able to function than when this first happened, but still the days that just kind of gut punch you and you're kind of crawling on your hands and knees like, okay, have to function. Really hard, but have to function.
Yeah. And so this book kind of shares The main character, we can still talk about the main character, and the main
Oh, yeah.
character is going to experience, deep loss and grief and trauma. It kind of works really well for both of us because we both have experienced intense grief, trauma associated with that grief. But at the same time, this isn't going to be a super heavy, we're not like trauma warrior chats. This is not that.
This is not going to be, this will not be grief bingo.
No.
Other than the potentially funny one that I picked up from the grief site Modern Loss, where it's like, have you cried at the grocery store, at your doctor's, at the gas station, that kind of thing. Yes. It would be a funny grief bingo.
Yes. Yeah. And both of us, I have a feeling both of our grief bingo cards would be very full.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
This is our thing, talking books.
Yes.
Getting captivated, talking about books, and having those great hallway conversations about whatever book we just read and found incredibly interesting, that we figured the other person would enjoy, and not necessarily the highbrow lit that we read for school. In some cases, it was what we called highbrow trash.
Yes.
So it's just things where it's books that you want to say, it's like, I love this book, you need to read this book. Yes. So that we talk about it, and this one, and Ronald Malfi's Come With Me is one of those books where it's like, I want people to read this so that we can talk about it.
Yes.
Because it is such a great book.
Yeah. So what would happen is you and I would have we were a book club of 2. It was just
I know.
So now we're having a book club because now there's a platform. We have a platform here. That's why you are a co-host. That's why you're not just the guest. You're the co-host today. Because this episode is very different than, the regular show, so to speak. And we already have another book lined up next month to kind of do the same kind of format. So we might kind of do this for like maybe a few more shows. So towards at the end of the month, we do this little co-hosty book club where we share these amazing books. And so without further ado, why don't we dive in and share why this book is so freaking awesome and everyone needs to know about it. So why don't you start us off, Kelly?
Okay, well, one of the things I figure, the listeners are probably saying, you guys keep talking about this book. How good is it? The writing in this book is phenomenal. It's absolutely incredible. And I'm picky. I'm pretty picky when it comes to talking about great writing.
Yes.
I found a non-spoilery passage to just kind of give people an idea of what the writing is like. And this is very early in the book, where Aaron Decker, our narrator, is saying, normally I kill for a plate of French toast from the Fat Rooster Cafe, 2 slices of artisan bread as thick as Bibles, a dusting of powdered sugar, maple syrup as dense and rich as tree sap. Okay, number 1, I read that passage and I suddenly thought, I really want French toast. I haven't had it in a while and I really want it. And I want this particular dish of French toast. But his writing is just so incredible. You start reading from page 1 and you cannot put this book down. I mainlined it. It is incredible. It's one of those, there's a little bit of everything in it for everybody. If you want a mystery, it's got a mystery. If you want a ghost story, it has a ghost story. If you're into horror, there's that. If you're into the horror of real life, like not the boogeyman horror, but the kind of horror that's just in our world, it's there too.
Yeah. The second you start reading, you are sucked in instantly. And like you said, you don't want to stop. It was so hard to stop reading, to do other things. Like you just wanted to keep going. And you're like, crap, I have to go take a shower. I have to go get ready. I have to
he takes his time with scenes. They are just so rich and so detailed. And he's just dropping all these little breadcrumbs along the path where you're just, what is happening? Where is he going with it? Because not a single word is wasted. This is not, I've read books where I thought we could have edited this down by 10, 20 pages. This is not one of those books. Every single word, every single sentence, every single page needs to be there. This is one of those books you just like, you and I were saying, oh, I have to go take a shower. I have to do this. I have to do that. One more page. And then you look up and realize, oops, I did 20. So it's just, if you're looking for a compelling story that is well written, this is the book to grab.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about, I know our theme today is kind of horror as healing, as you put it, grief and storytelling to process emotions and trauma. This is also a really good book, whether you've experienced grief recently or a while ago. You read this book and you realize this guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Have you noticed how Coffee Fueled Stories doesn't have any ads? That's because I work tirelessly to keep this show alive. After 3 years on my own, I've decided I need to ask for your help. I've never asked anyone to subscribe. I've never asked anyone to leave a review. I've never asked anyone to rate the show. And I've never asked anyone to pay to listen. There are a few ways you can help support the show. I've created a Patreon page, Coffee Fueled Stories, and a subscription section on my podcast website. It's simple to support and help me keep my dream alive. Just click the link in the show notes to set up your paid subscription option. It's that easy. Thank you for your support. Yeah, absolutely. The story is based on a real life situation in the sense that Ron experienced grief and loss of a friend. And this was his story, how he processed that grief. That from that pain and that suffering came this book. Again, for you and I who went through trauma, grief, pain, suffering, and we were able to relate to this book on so many different levels, but also appreciate the storytelling of this, like, just insane, brilliant book.
Exactly. It's one of those that it's an incredible story, even if you've not experienced an intense grief. This is still a book to read. It's not one of those where you think, do I have to have gone through this to understand it? No, it's just the passages are so eloquent. And it's one of those where if you have experienced it, some of the stuff he drops in there, you realize, oh, it wasn't just me. One of the things he has in there, because our character, Aaron Decker, having to go out, having to still do things, talks about the concept of other Aaron.
Yes.
Where other Aaron takes over, and sort of one of the sentences was fully focused on target, operating like some mechanical thing engineered to do so. And you've been there, listeners have probably been there, where you have to go out and you have to do things and you have to put this mask on. Yeah. And it's like this other aspect of you takes over so that you go and you do the business that needs to be done tied to your loved one's passing, or just going out in general, because as you have stated, you still have to buy cat litter, you still have to buy dog food, still have to go out and do these things. And it's like this other being sort of takes over. And I just thought that was an interesting concept. One, people who are grieving have to go through that. And two, you do see that in some horror stories, that this idea of the automaton, of being possessed, of being taken over. And he uses it as a survival. He's saying it's a survival tactic.
Yeah.
And it's true.
It's
a survival tactic.
Totally.
Yeah.
It just something that kind of switches over. And the very first time he introduced us to other Aaron, like I said, I was very much able to relate. Again, to your point, if you haven't experienced extreme pain, loss through trauma, suffering, it's not to say this book isn't for you. That's not what we're saying.
No.
This book, because we experienced that, it just took us that much deeper into the character, because we could relate to the character so much on that level.
For lack of a better description, it's sort of like a scary Easter egg. Like if you have been through this, this is still a phenomenal book. Pick it up and read it.
Yes.
If you have been through grief, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, wow, I found a really smelly, rotten Easter egg that's been sitting here since last year, and it's frightening. But, and I'm not saying that to dissuade people who've been through grief, but it's just more like your enjoyment of the book becomes that much more intense because there's this extra level. You will enjoy it if you're not grieving or you've not been through it. And if you have been through this pain and trauma, it's just that extra level where you go, aha. It's just, it's he gets it. And it's very healing to read that. Like, okay, other people have been through that. It isn't just me. This is something normal. If you can call grief normal. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes. So, yeah. And it's like, oh, this is a normal aspect of it. Okay, that means I'm on the right path toward processing, toward healing.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
If you can use that word.
And so again, I felt like I could really relate to Erin and other Erin in that regard. With this book, it just kind of, like you said, it confirms that, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy feeling these things. Like you were saying, one of my favorite lines, grief hates a moving target.
I almost underlined that one because it's true.
Yeah. For me, doing the work in the mornings and the evenings, they sucked. Mm-hmm. However, during that daytime, I could fill my mind with work. I was able to go, to Rome. I was able to do things. But at the same time, even though you fill your mind with these things, the grief doesn't go away. You can't but at the same time, you can kind of help your mind heal a little bit, focus on. So there's a line in there where she the sister, Tracy, tells Erin, I made you a list of chores. And the list of chores is eat, shower, breathe. I know that sounds so crazy, but you know this.
You have to. So, right, I want to say a month after my mom passed, I started creating to-do lists, putting the big things on there, but also putting the really ticky tiny small things on there so that one, I didn't forget to do them. Two, I could look at that and go, okay, well, I've done that. I had the satisfaction. I called them gimmies. This included things like load the dishwasher, run the dishwasher, unload the dishwasher. I could sit there and go, oh, look, I've done 3 things today.
Yes.
Yes. One of those things where if you've been there, getting up, doing the hygienic stuff, making sure you've eaten a nutritious meal, taking your dog for the walk, or getting out and gardening, or just doing these things. They are major accomplishments in those early days. Like you practically want to throw a party like, oh, hey, I vacuumed the house. That's awesome. Yay. I'm still functioning. Malfi writes in there. It's like what Erin gets into in this book, the journey that his wife sort of puts him on becomes the way he functions. You need something to function. You need something, whether it's something as simple as making sure your house is dust free every day. You need something to function to keep your hand. The other thing is keeping your hands busy.
Yeah, a project. Yeah. Some sort of project.
Yeah. Whether and it could be something where you're writing, you're taking photographs, whatever, or like in the case of this book, researching and doing something. We can't get too spoilery. Yeah. But doing something, taking on his wife's passion. Yeah. And making that his passion. It's making sure you're still moving and that the grief hates the moving target.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that you brought up that sentence because I just looked at it last night when I was skimming the book again for my notes. And I thought, should I bring that up? I'm glad you did instead. So there we go.
Well, and you brought up the French toast. The French toast is thick as Bibles. And the way that he described, I'm like, I want to go to Fat Rooster too and eat the exact same thing. Like,
well, I remember your interview with him, and you guys talked about his descriptions of food
Yes.
and coffee.
Yes.
And I was starting to read this book, and I thought, I wonder if he's going to do that. It's like I said, the French toast thing is on page 3 or 4. And I thought, bam, there we go. I just thought,
Yeah.
excellent.
And he does talk about coffee several times in
Mhm.
the book. Coffee is good. Let's go with coffee.
Let's go with coffee.
He describes coffee. His character drinks coffee, and the way that he describes coffee and how his characters, drink their coffee. 2 of the characters drink 2 pots of coffee.
Mhm.
And I was like, these are my friends.
These are my people.
Yes. And the best part was, so Erin is at this other character's house. She says, go make the coffee, go make another pot. And like, he doesn't even hesitate. So clearly it's not like some fancy ass machine. It's a basic coffee maker. And I was like, hallelujah. That made me so happy.
I know. I see all these coffee machines that they're advertising on TV, and I'm looking at it going, yeah, but does it make a cup of coffee? Like a basic cup of coffee. I don't want the fancy, nothing against it, but I'd rather pay the barista. That's why I go out to the coffee places, to have the barista make me the fancy ass cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Because when I'm at home, it's just a pour over. It's just your simple pour over, and then I might add some cream to it. I don't need anything fancy. So same thing when he's talking about just your basic machine. I thought, I can actually envision this, and I know how to use it. Wow. Okay, that's great.
Same here. The second she said, go make another pot, I was like, uh-oh. Like my brain went, uh-oh. What's going to happen here? How is Erin going to handle the situation?
Exactly. It's like, are we talking about a NASA calibrated machine, or are we talking about one where you just go boop and that's it?
Yeah.
It doesn't even go boop. It's just like one button and that's it.
Click. Yeah, totally.
Make sure you add the water, slam it shut, hit the button, walk away.
Boom.
Because I feel like some of these other ones, it's like, is he going to talk to me in a minute? Because I don't want it talking to me.
Right.
Yeah.
I know. I'm like, it's a basic, like all you need is a basic coffee maker, classic Mr. Coffee type of coffee maker. And I was like, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Erin. Thank you very much for handling the situation in the best possible way.
It also makes the character relatable.
Yes, absolutely.
Relatable because, okay, I don't know how many people I know actually have the fancy coffee maker, but I don't. So it makes the character relatable, and it's just these kind of details that make this story incredible.
Yes.
It doesn't have to include those kind of details, but he does. That's why I say not a single word of this book is wasted. Not a single sentence, paragraph, page.
Yeah.
This is one of the most tightly edited books that I've come across in the last couple of months. So it's just, what do the youngsters say these days? Chef's kiss?
Yes.
This book is chef's kiss.
Absolutely. All right. So we were talking about coffee, and I love that he did put the coffee in there. So that was awesome. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, you and I both, because again, this is very much like our hallway conversation and how we process books. That is, we're nerdy that way, and that we take notes, we highlight and tab. When you and I were talking about this book, Ron's book, Come With Me, and Horror as Healing, we kind of had a couple of talking points to kind of like, keep the show, so to speak, on point, and to keep ourselves on point, because we can go deep and far.
Yeah. And then also deep and far on one point. When we should be like hitting 50.
Yes. So to keep us on point, we came up with some talking points, and that was, so the theme itself was horror as healing, using this book because it just felt like a very good topic and theme to have based on this book and our experiences. Then the other talking points we have are Other Erin, which we've talked about that. And then there's trauma and grief. He kind of talks about that as well. And we don't want to go into too much of that because Again, we don't want to give any spoilers.
This
And
is
then
this is such a hard book to discuss. You want to recommend it, but it is very hard to discuss it because there's so much to spoil, and you want a reader to hit it cold.
yes,
Because there's so much stuff where you read it and you go, oh my God, what? And then you go further and you're like, wait, what? It's just that over and over and over in the best possible way. And so it's one of those that, again, all I can tell listeners is please pick this book up. Please pick it up and read it. You know?
yes. My mind was blown with the prose of within the book, the pacing of the book. Like you said, the fact that he was efficient with his book. So there were so many times I was constantly having my mind blown. I was just like,
Mhm.
every time I had to stop reading because, you know, I had things to do.
Yeah.
I would put the book down and I'd be like, damn it, Ron, that was some good shit.
It's the story.
Yes.
It's the writing and it's the story. And that is the case with this book. You start reading it and you're like, I don't care how this thing ends. I just want to read this. The prose is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And like I said before, a little bit of something for everybody. You want a mystery? It's got a mystery. You want a ghost story? It's got a ghost story. And that's one of the things that I also thought made this a perfect book for the idea of horror as healing, because here's where I'm going to get a little academic. You look at every culture has ghost stories, and some of them are meant to scare you, but at the same time, I think we tell ghost stories because we don't want to think our loved ones are permanently gone. We want this idea that maybe I can't see them, hear them, feel them, any of these things, but they're still there somehow. Yeah. Whether it's their essence, their spirit, you'll go mystical. You need it. And that's one of the things too, I found healing with this horror book. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one who went mystical. I didn't lose my mind and suddenly go nuts.
And we talked about this.
Crazy.
And you kind of are. Sometimes you kind of are. And
I spoke with yeah. Go ahead.
And I was just gonna, and we talked about this, like you and I have talked about this, and we've shared books and we've shared websites, you know, to kind of help us, you know, get through these experiences and this time in our life. And, you know, it's grief is unlike any of the other emotions, because, you know, usually if you're angry, for the most part, you're angry, and that's just one single emotion at that particular time. You're able to process it and you move on. But with grief, it's not so much just one emotion. It's a combination of emotions all at the same time, depending on, you know, which one you think you're feeling first. And so your brain just kind of gets overloaded, and you do become slightly crazy. Like you're just like, what the fuck is going on right now?
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that nobody tells you. That so you're one of the ones that warned me, because a lot of the losses I had prior to my mom, I was a child. So it's different dealing with grief when you are a child compared to you're an adult. Right. So I had a painfully intimate knowledge of what it's like to lose people as a child. My mom was one of the first significant adult losses. So it's one of those things where your advice, where you're saying, you're going to feel 5 different emotions in 5 minutes. You are not crazy. It's okay. Actually, no, you might be a little crazy, but if losing a beloved parent doesn't drive you nuts, or losing anyone that close to you doesn't drive you nuts, I don't know what will. Thing that the Mad Hatter says, we're all mad here, you know, and that is exactly what grief does. You start looking at things in ways you might not have before, where you might have been skeptical. And that's why I was saying too, with this book, when I was reading it, and
you do, and you so you become, like you said, you become mystical, and you accept it.
Like I said, just dip my toe slightly in the academic pool, because I have difficulty not doing so. If you think about horror as a way to heal, we've all done it, because when we think of fairy tales, We think of the Disney version. We think of the ones that they package for children. But if you read the original fairy tales, they're some really dark.
That's some dark shit.
Right. It's some dark shit.
That's
It
some
is
dark shit.
incredibly, they are incredibly frightening. It doesn't matter if you pick a country in Europe, in Asia, Africa, Native American folk tales, fairy tales are horrifying.
Yes.
And it was, I think, it was not only a way to entertain one another, it was also a way of coping with really hard things. Because how many of these stories start with a significant death? The death of a parent, usually, but sometimes it's the death of a spouse, the death of a friend. It's one of those things where I think using horror as a stepping stone into healing, and you sort of need that reinforcement of it's okay to go through this scary stuff. You don't think you can do it, but you can, and you'll make it through the other side. So horror and grief, it's one of those things that you can see why people will do a deep dive into a certain genre, because it's an incredibly wonderful coping mechanism, and stories create that coping mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's that's why I just thought this book, this theme, perfect. It's one of those things where it provides this comfort. And that's why, like I said, seeing that this is a ghost story book.
Yeah. So many layers.
Yeah, so many layers. And it's what we discussed before. You don't have to have gone through grief and trauma to enjoy this book. But if you have, there's just that extra layer.
It's going to take you. Yeah.
It's going to take you. And I don't know if you want to say you enjoy the confirmation of, oh, okay, but it gives you that validation where it's like, I'm not losing my mind. My friends are not saying they agree with me because they're trying to be nice.
Right.
Here's someone I do not know. The extent of my knowledge of Ronald Malfi is tied to the 2 podcasts you did with him before for his band Veer, and then for his writing. So I don't know this man, but he's written something where it's like, you too have walked this terrible path. Oh God, I'm sorry, but I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one seeing the same sights as I walk this terrible path, you know?
Absolutely.
So that's why, that's why this book is just so many incredible, wonderful things.
Yes. And one of the talking points that you had was the Japanese terms. And what's really cool, again, to have you, this is why it's so important to have you here, because I love your last. Do you know that I never say just your first name? If I'm ever talking to Brandy or someone else, and I'm talking about you, I never say Kelly. And that's, I don't know, something is missing. It's kind of like your last name is like your samurai sword. Oh, because that is like how you are in my head. You are like this badass samurai sword wielding literature. To me, if I just say Kelly, you're missing your source. So that's why I always say Kelly Shimabukuro. Besides, okay, it took me like forever to learn how to say your name. So I'm proud of saying your name.
I really appreciate the time you took to learn it. I always tell people Japanese is a phonetic language.
Yes.
Sound it out by syllable and you will get it right. And that usually is what breaks the ice, that gets people to actually focus and say the name correctly. I also always get people asking me if I'm related to Jake Shimabukuro, the famous ukulele player. And it's kind of like, not to my knowledge, as uncommon as Shimabukuro is here in the US, this is like the version of Smith in Okinawa. The portion of Okinawa where my family is originally from, just about everybody there is either a Shimabukuro or an Ota or an Oshiro. So it's one of those things where it's like, if he's a relative, it's just because our family comes from the same area, but to my knowledge, no, not a relative. I just found it very interesting that he taps into a number of Japanese terms. One of the ones he has in there doesn't spoil anything. It comes toward the end of the book, yugen. Awareness that the universe transmits a profound and mysterious beauty that can only be understood by the man or woman engaged in the comparable beauty of human suffering. And it's one of those things where my grandmother always said, you can't understand joy without sadness. You cannot understand beauty without ugliness. And I think it is the same thing to connect it to the main theme of this episode, grief, horror, and healing. Grief is wild because it is the worst house guest you can have sitting at your table, but it's that weird double-edged sword because it also makes you remember the happy memories. And as you get distance from the loss, the happy memories do start to bring comfort. They can still cut you. They can still cause some pain, but you start to realize how comforting they can be, the joy those happy memories bring. And in some cases, they're that much better because you have experienced that much more pain. Yes. And I just thought it was really interesting he brought that up. He also brings up the concept of the ukiyo, the floating world, saying living in the here and now with complete and utter detachment from the rest of the surrounding universe. The ukiyo is usually associated with what we would call the demimonde, brothels, that kind of thing. There's a whole series of paintings and drawings, I think from I want to say the 1800s. They're known as the ukiyo paintings. Various artists in Japan created these hokusai, many others. And it's just one of those where it's a term usually associated with the world of pleasure. And in here, he associates it with the world of sadness. But in a way, it is correct because when you are grieving, you detach from the world. You just kind of don't realize what's happening around you. Even if you're trying to pay attention, you're just hyper focused on what's in front of you. And I just thought it was interesting. He brought that up too. And then the third thing was there's a scene in the book. He's having a dream where he's imagining this thing looming over him. And I think I texted you the title of the painting. It's the skeleton specter painting. It's just the way this giant skeleton specter is looming over these samurai warriors. It's being conjured by a witch. And the way it's just looming over these warriors, I thought, that's kind of how I pictured this thing he describes looming over the bed. And I just thought, it's very interesting how much he taps into these Japanese terms, especially since in Japan, they have so many ghost stories.
Right.
So many ghost and demon stories. Japan is considered one of the most haunted countries in the world, just based on the number of ghost stories, the number of demonic and ghostly figures. And I thought, that seems right.
Right.
Because I grew up hearing some of these ghost stories. Even though my dad was born and raised in Hawaii, he was told these ghost stories from his parents. And when I was a kid, he toned them down slightly. So there would be times where it's dark and I'm like, I don't want to walk down the hallway because what if that thing is there? That's just, like I said, I just thought it was really interesting.
Especially because he chose to use Japanese culture and use Japanese terms. Way back when, you recommended the Wind Up Bird Chronicles to me. And that was my first time experiencing Japanese stories. And there was a lot of times where I was confused. I didn't understand the cultural reference. Why would he deep dive into this or talk about this particular thing for like 3 pages? And then I would go to you and I would be like, hey, Kelly, so I'm really confused. This passage came up. I don't know what's happening. And then you would tell me culturally, this is why there's a significance and this is why he's toning in on this. And I would be like, okay, perfect. So that's why I was like, out of all of the people to talk with this book, I was like, I have to have my friend who is a samurai wielding literature major. So I was like, I am not going to tap into any of the Japanese terms. You can speak of the Japanese terms and you can, help guide us with this Japanese layer that he's put in there. And so I was like, it made sense. So thank you for being my samurai wielding literature major friend.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for that incredible title, because I have a feeling I'm one of those. It's like the samurai who trips on her own sword and goes through the paper screen wall, and everybody's sitting there going, you called her here. Why did you call her here again? So I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's one of those where it's hilarious that you mentioned the Wind Up Bird Chronicles, because he does make Aaron Decker a translator of Japanese literature. And that's how Aaron, that's the book Aaron is carrying when he meets Allison. When I came across that, I'm like, it was meant to be that we discussed this book.
Totally.
I realized it is Haruyuki Murakami's most famous work. Like, if you're going to read him, everyone usually hits Norwegian Woods or the Wind Up Bird Chronicles.
Yeah.
But yeah. I just thought, okay, we are meant to talk about this book, not only because you've had Ron on before, but look at all these things lining up. Speaking of mystical, there you go.
I was like, whoa, how cool is that?
Mind blown.
Totally. All right, so we are going to wrap up this awesome session. It's awesome.
This has been so much fun. So it's like
I not to not talk about this book, but I am looking forward to doing this again next month, at the end of next month, with our next book. And so the fact that we started with Ron to kind of get us in this, like I said, it was the perfect book to have you as the co-host again, because you and I go back. So it just, again, on so many layers, this was the perfect book, our friendship, the pumpkin spice latte connection, like all of it is just so thank you. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you. No, thank you. You've had such incredible guests, so it's a real honor.
We're gonna take it down a notch. So I'm gonna share a couple of stories. Because I love that you encourage me as much as I encourage you with our silliness, especially when it comes to books and authors. So we're gonna go back to, I think you know where I'm going with this.
I do, yeah.
So hopefully, I don't know if Lisa Lane listens to the show, but she's gonna have to listen to this episode, because we're gonna give some props to Lisa Lane, our world lit professor. Yes. And she did we did a couple of books on so this was our post-colonial studies, and we did a couple of books on Jamaica Kincaid.
Yes.
Okay, loved her books, loved her writing, loved all of that, and we're not going to go into the academic aspect of that. We're setting up what's going on. This is why you and I are friends. Besides just, hanging out in the hallway talking books. I found out Jamaica Kincaid was a guest lecturer at the Claremont Colleges, which is not too far from where we lived. It was maybe an hour and a half from where we lived. I immediately called you up and was like, Kelly, you are not going to believe this. Well, Kelly-san, because Michelle-san, Kelly-san, that's how we address each other. Kelly-san, you are not going to believe this. Jamaica Kincaid is a guest speaker at Claremont Colleges. You have to come with me, because we are going to go to her office hours. We're going to bring our textbooks, and we're going to get her to sign our textbooks. This is why you and I are friends. So I said, let's go crash her office hours at Claremont Colleges. Just show up on campus.
We forever referenced it as the Jamaica Kincaid caper.
Yes.
Even though we did not actually do it, we had this whole thing mapped out like in a heist.
We had an elaborate plan. We did. We had the whole caper planned out.
Exactly.
And I really, for like a year and a half, I want to say, we kept planning it and talking about it and wanting to do it. Yeah. And then unfortunately, we just never did it.
We never got around to doing it. But the thing is, it's like I said, we practically had this thing. You could do our version of Ocean's 11 with the Jamaica Kincaid caper. Okay, we have to schedule it down to the barest minute practically, and we have to hopefully scooch in there before any of her students get there.
Yeah.
And I remember we were just laughing how she would probably be sitting at the desk wondering, who are these two nutcases? And how do I call security?
And the fact that you went along with it,
Well, I was kind of like, okay, give me the go. So,
Oh my God. Like again,
yeah,
this is
was,
that's why you are the co-host, because you are
oh,
not a guest, you are a co-host. You are just as crazy as I am about books. So thank you.
oh no, thank you. I love talking books. This is the perfect book to kick off something like this. This is a mystery.
Yep.
It's a ghost story.
Yep.
It's a horror novel.
Yeah.
It's almost a teeny tiny travel log.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of something in here for everybody. I would also say for people who aren't into horror, this is a great gateway book. This
Yes.
is a very good gateway book, because I know some
Perfect
people
gateway book.
horror can be a little, it's kind of hard to recommend horror. This is one of those where it's like, this is a gateway book if you
Yes.
just want to kind of dip your toe into horror, because you don't want the splatter fest, or you don't want to be too frightened. Like, you want to be able to walk through your house at night without freaking out. This is a really good book. It's a great toe dipper into horror.
Yes.
It's the kind of book where if somebody said, I don't really like horror, I would still say, try this one.
Yes.
It's got enough horror in it to call it horror, but it's not something that's going to put off someone who might be a little horror shy. It's either going to be just enough, or it's going to be that doorway opener where they're like, hey, I actually kind of like this. Maybe I want to try something a little more scary now, or a little more graphic or whatnot. This book is just, like I said, chef's kiss.
Yes. It's the perfect, I think it's probably like the perfect gateway book to Ronald Malfi, I would say. Like,
Yeah.
because I haven't read any of his. I don't. When I did the chat with him, literally it was 24 hours before I had to chat with him, so I wasn't able to read a full book. So he sent a little short story, and I was able to read that, and again thoroughly enjoyed that. But this was my first full novel, so to have this one again, there's so many reasons that this book was awesome to talk with you about, and this was the perfect gateway book into his work.
After reading Come With Me, Ronald Malfi is getting tacked onto that list where it's like, oh, he's got a new book coming out. Okay, well, first I gotta work my way through the back catalog. I gotta
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
But he's got a new one coming out too.
Yeah.
It's bookmarked. I'm making note of when it's coming out so that I remember to start looking at the various sites where I purchase books, the bookstore where I like to go, that kind of thing. And it's just, I have to thank you for introducing me to his work. It is because of your show and the interview you did with him where I thought, I have to try to read one of this guy's stuff, because it made me poke around online. It made me look at various review sites and realize, oh, wow, maybe I should give this guy a shot. So we can thank your show for that too, because it's just one of those like, this is why I love the fact that you're doing this.
Well, thank you. And he was actually recommended by Rebecca, and because they're friends, and so and Rebecca was somebody that I wanted to have on the show, and again it took 3 years just to get her on the show. And so she was like, hey, why don't you go ahead and have Ron on? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Again, I literally had 24 hours to prepare. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then, same thing, went to Barnes and Noble. There was a whole bunch of books, and I was like, holy crap. Again, I was like, I don't have time to read one of these novels before, doing the show. As I said on the show, I could have, but I don't think I would have done justice. Again, you and I spent a good 3 weeks. So we took our time with this book, and that's exactly what I wanted to. And I'm so glad that we did that. And that we didn't, just blow through it and then talk about it. We had time to like mull it over several times.
No, I was going to say, it's one of these books that you want to give it respect. The work he's put into this. Also, I did not realize it was coming from such a deeply personal place for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so it's one of those where not only the amount of work he put into it, the emotion that went into it. horrifying becomes strangely comforted because you are going through your own personal horror story, that the horror of some other story, it suddenly becomes very comforting, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not the only one going through the worst thing possible. And so yeah, you want to respect the amount of work and the amount of emotion he put in there, because it could not have been easy.
Yeah.
It was probably therapeutic for him to channel it into a book,
Yeah.
but it probably also hurt. And you don't want to rush that. It feels to me, it would feel disrespectful to do that to a writer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The best way to describe it. And so it just, again, everything just worked out. And the fact that, there were so many layers of it, we were able to connect and, share to the listeners to let them know, same thing. Like, we're doing our best to not spill the beans. But the most important thing we want to say is this book is absolutely a great read for so many different reasons. We loved this book. Come With Me, Ronald Malfi, Chef's Kiss. Perfect.
5 stars.
So on that note, Kelly, let's wrap this up. And
Yes.
my cheeks are hurting because I have been laughing and enjoying this thoroughly.
It's just been so much fun.
Totally. So thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank
You know the tagline because you listen to the show, you love the show. To have you on the show, to be the co-host, to hang out, to share the stories, and to talk about Ron's book, like it just meant the world. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I get to say the tagline? Oh
You
my
get to say
goodness.
the tagline. Yes.
Oh, that's such a great honor. Thank you. Go forth and be magical.